It's 6:30 in the morning and freezing cold. I'm attending early morning mass at a Roman Catholic seminary in Regensburg. I feel out of place, but I'm fascinated. It's a completely different world for someone like me from the traditionally Protestant city of Berlin. Here in Bavaria, I'm in the heart of Roman Catholic Germany. This is where Pope Benedict XVI comes from. I've come to inquire why men become priests these days, why people with a lot of choice give up their worldly lives. 60 men aged between 20 and 50 live here. Most would likely become parish priests. They eat together, study together and pray together, from early morning till late at night. Men like 24-year-old Michael Vogt and 22-year-old Christian Huber. I've arranged to talk with Christian after breakfast. He entered the seminary 3 years ago and lives in this simple 22-square-meter room. His parents and friends couldn't understand his decision, which was inspired by his meeting Frère Roger, the founder of the ecumenical Taizé community in France 6 years ago. Christian tells me that he didn't have a particularly religious upbringing, but when he got involved with the church, he realized it did him good and he liked it. It gave him an inner calm that he hadn't had before, though he hadn't been unhappy, but this was a new kind of well-being, he says. Later, I meet his fellow seminarian, Michael Vogt. He takes me to his home village near Altbutting, one of Germany's most famous pilgrimage sites. He was once an altar boy here. He decided he wanted to become a priest when he was 12. My mother agreed, he tells me. She said that was his vocation. Now they've thought about him not giving them any grandchildren, but he says he's not an only child. Both his parents supported his decision, but there weren't many people in his village who understood a career choice which involved remaining single and chaste, even though most people here are Catholic. Michael's mother tells me some were delighted he'd made such a choice in this day and age. Others were appalled. One person said he just needed a girlfriend, another that it was the worst thing possible. These people all want to marry a Catholic and have their children confirmed, she says. But they can't imagine why a young person from their community should enter the priesthood. I'm back at the seminary. This afternoon, singing lessons are on the schedule. When you sing psalms, teacher Gabi Tenschert explains, it's important to know which words to stress. She comes to the seminary a few times a week. Otherwise, she teaches actors and singers. Gabi tells me some of the seminarians have a different attitude to their bodies, so she'll explain more to them, rather than teach them hands-on. Many have no problem, but there are some with whom she's more careful. She says she's more aware of not encroaching on their personal space.
Segne euch der allmächtige Gott, der Vater und der Sohn und der Heilige Geist.
After singing, it's time for some serious study. The training lasts around 7 years, and along with theology, they must learn things like church law, pastoral psychology, the liturgy. Are these men odd or quite remarkable individuals? It depends on your point of view, I think. In the late afternoon, I meet the 8 seminarians who have completed their studies. This is their final rehearsal for their ordination as deacons tomorrow. They will take a vow of celibacy and promise obedience to their bishops. Patrick Berkinger tells me the ceremony marks the transition from the laity to a life in the church. They're not now getting something, Patrick explains, like a job at BMW or Siemens. He says they dedicate themselves to the service of God. They're aware of their limits, that they may be weak or make mistakes, but they will use their strengths to serve the kingdom of God. But fewer men are becoming priests, the rector of the seminary, Martin Priller, says. Just 200 people a year enter seminaries in Germany. 20 years ago, it was 3 times as many. He says people immediately think of the uncertainty that has arisen because of the tragedy and debate about sexual abuse. He says that will be playing a role in why, in recent years, men have found it much harder to decide to enter a seminary. Parents, family members, teachers and friends all ask, do you really want to do that? Do you really think you could? Have you thought it through? He says he's observed that for a long time. But when he was a seminarian, many people came and gave it a go. They took a look. There was a higher turnover then, but now the situation has changed in that respect. People take much longer to think and reflect before they decide. That evening I go to Mass with Christian Huber. He remembers well spring 2010, when the sexual abuse cases shook the Catholic Church to its roots. Although clergy are a normal sight on the streets of Regensburg, at times walking through the city was like running the gauntlet. Christian says people sometimes shouted obscenities at him, and he'd have to decide how to react. If you put your head down and ran, maybe they'd feel like they'd won. But he'd go up to them and say, I didn't quite hear what you said, and often they'd reply, nothing, I didn't say anything. As I sit at Mass, that's what I think about. People don't understand why anyone decides to be a priest. You might be suspected of involvement in sexual abuse. You have to give up the idea of having a family or having sex. Is it worth it? Isn't that too high a price for a young man today? There are times when you have doubts, Christian says, and you wonder if you'll get through, if this is what you really want. You might meet a woman on holiday and start imagining more. Then, he says, you have to come back to your inner self and ask yourself where it would lead and where you really want to go. I ask if that's happened to him. He says yes, it's happened more than once. It won't change, he says, even after he's been ordained. Getting ordained doesn't change who you are. During the rite of ordination, the bishop asks the candidates if they promise to obey and respect their bishops. The newly ordained deacons lie prostrate before the altar as a sign of their submission. They're submitting to a strictly regulated life in which they live without many things we think of as normal. But now I can see that they also get something that many people search for their whole lives, a sense of belonging and a community that makes them feel needed.